words are cheap. But words that are cheap can also be dangerous when spoken carelessly and irresponsibly. But it is given to us, to each of us, with the intellect to discern what word to follow and what word to believe and to trust. My dear sisters and brothers, a couple of years ago when I was back home in India, it was election time, and while walking through the bazaar, I came across this huge billboard, election campaign. And it depicted a meadow with a lot of sheep, a flock of them, a herd of sheep. And right in the view of the sheep was this huge billboard within the billboard, depicting a wolf dressed in business suit, all smiles, teeth, white teeth and sharp, and these words beneath, "I'm going to eat you." And one of the sheep reads these words, and very proud that she could read, turns to the other sheep and says, he says what he means. You have to be impressed with how convincing he is. My dear sisters and brothers, the gospel of the day tells us that Jesus wasn't sounding convinced, but he was very convincing. Unlike the Pharisees and the rabbinical teachers, Jesus wasn't merely sounding convincing, but rather he was indeed convincing. So much so, his audience would say, "What is this? A new teaching with authority?" Because at Jesus' time, every teacher of the law would always appeal to the Torah and to the prophet Moses. But Jesus alone could say, "You heard that it was said, but I say to you." And not only that, he could turn to the wind and the sea and say, "Be still," and they would be still. Or he would turn to the man with paralysis and say, "Rise, pick up your bed and go home." And the man would pick up his mat and go home. Or again, he would turn to a little girl, the dead body of a little girl, and say, "Talitha kum," little girl, I say to you, arise. And the girl would arise from death. Jesus wasn't merely sounding convincing, his words were powerful. As I said a little while ago, words may be cheap and may turn to be deadly if used with ill intent. But words can also be powerful if they are used by the right person for the right motive. God spoke, and the world came to be. Because God's word is powerful. What God wishes, what God speaks, what God articulates come to be. And that is the story of creation. God spoke, the world came to be. And he spoke again, and you and I came to be. And all along in the history of humanity, God has been speaking to us. But because we couldn't understand him fully, God would deign that his word should take on flesh and be in our midst physically. And that would be the story of the incarnation. Christ, the second person of the Trinity, would put on flesh and be born as Jesus. And John would say, and the Word became flesh and lived among us. And later on, John would go on to say, we proclaim to you what we have seen, what we have heard, and what we have touched. And they were so very convinced of the power and the love of the words of Jesus that they would go singing to their deaths. And Jesus wasn't merely sounding convincing, but he was moving them. When a sincere word is married to authentic action, that is when people are astonished. That is when people are moved. You know, it is possible, we find in the world of today, that words, cheap words, when manipulated, exploited, used with ill intent, can cause havoc. But that same word, when spoken with love, spoken by the appropriate person in the right way, for the right motive, it can heal wounds and warm hearts. It can breathe life into you. It can uplift your spirit. And that is what we hear in the gospel of the day as prophesied and foretold in the first reading of the day from the book of Deuteronomy. You and I can, like Jesus, or following his example, can speak words that are powerful, can speak words that are inspiring, can speak words that can build up and provide what is needed so that what we say will do good to those who hear us. But then, the words that we speak should be followed up with action. Or as we say, the liturgy we celebrate should be married to the life that we live. Our work and worship should be combined together, and then they become a powerful witness to the love of God. And so, as we go through the Eucharist, let's realize that our words can heal wounds and warm hearts, just like Jesus' words. And the words of Jesus are healing, and his healing is also a teaching. Parents and dear sisters and brothers, in the same way, our life is a sermon, and we need to mind what we preach, because our life, like word, reveal, they manifest, they make known, they communicate, they lead people. And the question is, are we leading them aright, or are we leading them astray? Because our life is a sermon, and we need to mind what we preach.